Hey, I don't know if you've ever heard of Bridger Wilderness Area. It's a national park in Wyoming, and it's a beautiful spot. And so if you're into camping, if you're into hiking, that might be something that you put on your bucket list to go visit Bridger Wilderness Area. But one of the things that they do in this state park is they have these comment cards for people to fill out and leave just any feedback that they have, any suggestions, just any part about their experience in the national park. And recently, the park published some of the most interesting comments that they received on these cards. I want to read a few of them to you. One person wrote this: "Too many bugs and leeches and spider webs. Please spray the wilderness to rid the areas of these pests." Another person wrote this: "Please pave the trails so they can be snow plowed during the winter." One person said, "Chairlifts need to be in certain places so we can enjoy wonderful views without ever having to hike to them." Another person wrote this: "The coyotes made way too much noise last night and kept me awake. Please eradicate these annoying animals." One person wrote, "A small deer came into my camp and stole my jar of pickles. If there is a way I can get reimbursed, please call." And then they left their number, right? Another person said this: "There are too many rocks in the mountains." One person wrote, "Escalators would be nice on the steep uphill sections." And then finally, a person wrote, "A McDonald's would be nice at the trailhead." And I like these comments because even though people are in the wilderness, they're complaining about bugs. They're seeking comfort in the wilderness. They're saying, "Can you please put escalators at steep uphill parts? It would be nice if we had a McDonald's at the trailhead." You do not need a McDonald's in the wilderness. But even though people are in the wilderness, they're complaining. And when you hear that, don't you just kind of want to say to them, like, it's the wilderness. Of course there's going to be bugs. You're on a trail. Of course you have to hike. It's going to be difficult. And it's kind of funny to see some of these comments from people who are in the wilderness. Like, you should expect this. You should know this. But here's what I find is that in life, we seek comfort. In a life where there is hardship and difficulty, in life, this same life where Jesus warned us in John chapter 16, verse 33, he said, "In this world, you will have trouble." In life, when we face trouble, which Jesus promised, instead of saying, "Oh, well, of course, I mean, we live, and so there's going to be trouble." In this life, when we face trouble, when we face discomfort, when things are tough, we often complain about it. We wonder why. Why is this happening? Why is this so hard? When we experience pain and suffering, it's like, why is this? And sometimes, I don't know if you ever want to say this or if you ever feel this way, sometimes I just want to tell people, welcome to life. That's how it is. I remember there was this one time, my brother-in-law, Ishmael, Irene's brother, came over to our house once because he had a tree fall down in his backyard. And he didn't have a fence up, and so he just kind of let it be there. And I guess a neighbor complained because you could see it from the street. So the city called him and said, "Hey, you got to get rid of this tree. If not, we're going to fine you." So that week, he's out there cutting up this tree, and he needs a place to put it. So he's like, "Hey, can I come put this in your backyard?" And I'm like, "Sure, we always want firewood." So he brought truckloads of this tree over to our house, and we're piling it up. And he asked me, like, "Hey, how are things going?" And I was like, "Man, it's tough because I got this project going on, and I'm working on this thing, and this thing happened." And I was like telling him just some of the hardships that I was facing. And he said to me, "That's everybody." And he wasn't being mean or anything. He was like, "Yeah, that's everybody." And I was like, oh, like when he said it, it was so sobering to me. It's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Because I mean, you just had a tree fall down in your yard and the city's about to fine you if you don't get rid of it. And so that's why you're over here. That's everybody. Do you ever want to say that? When somebody's going through something or complaining about something, don't you just say, "That's everybody. Welcome to life. That's how things are." That doesn't make your pain and suffering any easier. It doesn't make it any better. But it's true. That's how pain is. That's how life is. Jordan Peterson actually said it succinctly like this. He said, "Life is suffering." And so today I want to talk to you about suffering. I want to talk to you about pain. Not about if you go through pain, but when you go through pain. Because life is suffering. you're going to face pain. You're going to face suffering. And the question is, how do we deal with pain in this life? Just like there are bugs in the wilderness, there is pain in life. And so how do we deal with pain? How do we work our way through pain? And here's what I want to encourage you to do, man. You guys are so great at taking notes, whether it's writing it down or taking notes in your phone. Another way that we take notes here is we take pictures. So I want to invite you today, if you're a note taker, take notes. You're going to want to take notes on this. You're going to want to take pictures of what's on the screen. You're going to want to be able to refer back to this later on. And if you're not a note taker, I want to encourage you, take notes. Because this sermon today is going to be a day where you're going to want to go back and you're going to want to look and say, what did God teach me about pain and suffering? Because the truth is, a storm is coming in your life. Pain and suffering is coming in your life. Some of you are living in pain and suffering right now. And I want you to be able to go back and say, what did God teach me about pain and suffering and how to deal with it? Last week we had Pastor Carl Kuhl come and preach for us. And the thing that he said is that storms will come in your life. And you got to build your life on the rock-solid foundation of Jesus. And to try and build your life in the midst of the storm is not the time to do it. You got to prepare in advance. You got to build beforehand so that when the storm comes, you can weather it. The same is true with pain and suffering. And by the way, if you missed a sermon last week, you can go back and listen to it on our website. You can listen to it on our podcast. You can go back and listen to all of our sermons on our podcast and on our website. But today, I want to help us when it comes to pain and dealing with pain and suffering. And the truth is, some of you have suffered. Some of you have felt some pain. And you're going to face pain. And you're going to face suffering. And so, how do we deal with that? To help us, we're going to look at just a glimpse of Job's life. Job is this guy who just had a horrible season in life. We see his story in the Old Testament, and his name is spelled J-O-B, like Job, but we say Job. But there's this moment in his life where everything just fell apart. He dealt with pain and suffering. And so what I want to do is take a look at the book of Job. Recently, I read through the whole book of Job just in preparation for this. I came up with 4 lessons that we can learn about pain and suffering from looking at the life of Job. But I just want to take a glimpse at it. His life is really deserving of an entire series. We're going to talk about it in one sermon. But I want to look at his life and see what are 4 lessons we can learn when it comes to pain and suffering. And so first, the book of Job begins with we see Job, and he's a wealthy guy. He has cattle, he has sheep, he has a lot of possessions, he has a big family. He's an upright guy, he follows God. And then there's this moment where Satan, the devil, our enemy, gets permission from God to wreck Job's life. And that sentence right there deserves a whole sermon. I don't have time to get into it, though, and it's mind-blowing, but it's true. Satan, the enemy, the devil, gets permission from God to wreck Job's life. God says, yeah, go for it. And so what happens is, in one day, in the span of a few minutes, Job finds out his entire life is wrecked. See, what happens is 3 servants come to Job, one after the other. The first 2 servants come to Job and they say, hey, essentially everything that made you wealthy is gone. Your cattle have been stolen. Your sheep have been lost to natural disaster. Like everything that made you wealthy is gone. All of your possessions are gone. This is the first 2 servants say that. The third servant comes to Job and he says, hey, your family, your kids were all partying in this house and a tornado came, hit the house collapsed, killed all your kids. So like in the span of moments, Job finds out all of his wealth, all of his life, all of his kids are gone. But he doesn't turn his back on God. And then Satan goes to God and he says, here's the reason why he hadn't turned his back on you, because he still has his health. And if you let me take his health away, he's going to curse you. He's going to turn his back on you. And so God says, okay. Bizarre, right? Again, a whole other sermon for just that. Why would God do that? I don't have time to get into it. But what happens is Satan afflicts Job with this disease. And Job is covered in boils, sores, lesions from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. And they're open, pus-filled sores. They're oozing. They're in pain. Like, recently I've gone to the dermatologist for like nummular eczema and fungal folliculitis, and I feel like my life is in a tailspin, right? He's giving me some ointments and creams to put on. But like Job, his life is wrecked. I mean, it's described in the scriptures that he would sit in the dust. He'd cover himself with dust and scrape himself with broken pottery just to get some relief from how he was feeling. I mean, this guy is low. He's lost everything. He's lost his possessions, his kids, his health. And on top of that, he didn't lose his wife, though. His wife is still around, and his wife encourages him with this. She says to Job, why don't you just curse God and die? Thanks. Like, this is not what Job needs in that moment, but this is what he gets. And so this is where we see Job. Job is in this place of torment in life. And I want to show you what he says about this. And here's the first lesson. We see it in Job chapter 3, verse 3. Job says this as he's sitting there feeling this way, just down and out. He says, let the day of my birth be erased and the night I was conceived. Let that day be turned to darkness. Let it be lost even to God on high, and let no light shine on it. Why wasn't I born dead? Why didn't I die as I came from the womb? What I always feared has happened to me. What I dreaded has come true. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest. Only trouble comes. And I want you to notice the tension here and the dichotomy here. Job, who knows God, says, I have no peace. Jesus later in the New Testament, way after this instance with Job, Jesus says, my peace I bring to you. And so with God, we have peace, but Job knows God, and he says, I don't have any peace. It is possible for you to know God and not have peace, even though God brings peace. And Job just says, I don't have any peace. Job 29, verse 2, I long for the years gone by when God took care of me, when he lit up the way before me and I walked safely through the darkness. When I was in my prime, God's friendship was felt in my home. The Almighty was still with me and my children were around me. I long for those years. And then Job 19:7, I cry out, help, but no one answers me. You ever feel that way? I cry out, help, but nobody answers me. We're going to dive in the deep end today. I hope you're ready, because pain and suffering is hard and it's difficult. The first lesson is this: we need to be real that we suffer. How do we deal with pain and suffering? First, you need to be real that you suffer. You got to be real that you suffer. And this seems really obvious, but we're not really good at it. We are more expert at covering up and burying and shoving our suffering in the shadows than we are with being real about it and being real about how we feel inside, about what our pain and suffering is doing to us. And so if you're going to deal with pain and suffering in a healthy and good way, you got to be real about it. You got to be real that you suffer. Again, Jordan Peterson said, life is suffering. Nietzsche said, to live is to suffer. Jesus said, in this life, you will have trouble. The truth is, we are going to have pain and suffering. It's going to come in our life because we're alive. And we got to be real that we suffer. We got to be real with how we feel. And I think sometimes as we look at being real with the truth that we suffer, sometimes it's good for us to compare a little bit. Now, usually comparison is not a good thing, but sometimes we need to do a little bit of comparison when we suffer so that we can gain perspective. And so first, we have to be real that we do suffer and what it's doing inside of us, but I think it's important for us to make sure that what we're feeling inside is proportionate to what we're experiencing outside. What I mean is, the woman who says, my life is falling apart, like my world is crashing down around me because I just found out that my husband cheated on me. He left me for a high school flame, and I don't know what to do because this was not what we planned. This was not our dream. This was not the life that we wanted to build. And now I'm alone, and now my kids don't have a father, and my world is falling apart. Like when you hear that, like your heart just goes out to it, and you're like, oh my God, you're suffering. That is pain. Let me just sit with you and be with you, right? And then there's the person who says, my world's falling apart. Like my life is crashing down around me because my cat got a stomach bug and threw up last night, and I don't know what to do. Like when you hear that, it's like, I mean, if you had a dog, I could understand that, but right? But sometimes you hear, this is what's happening inside of me. It's the worst thing ever. It's crazy. And it's in those moments where it's just like, hey, cat lady, can I introduce you to the woman whose husband just left her? Just so that we can gain greater perspective. Sometimes we blow things way out of proportion. And so sometimes it's good for us to do some comparison and just gain some perspective on our suffering so that not everything is the end of the world. Now, there's another extreme that we got to avoid, though, and that's going to the point where we compare so much where we minimize and dismiss our pain. And it's like, well, they don't even have a dad, so how can I feel angry that my dad yelled at me? And so we can dismiss our pain, and we can like bury it and not bring it up. They can't even afford to go to college. Why should I feel stressed out that I'm failing a class? At least I'm in college, and then we can dismiss our pain. We can dismiss some of how we're feeling. And so there's two extremes here. One is that we are really extreme about unextreme situations, and it's good for us to gain some perspective by comparing and just realizing and putting things into perspective. But the other extreme is that we can compare so much to where we just say, my thing doesn't matter. And that's not good either. And so is this the end of the world? I don't know. But I'm angry. Is this going to change my life? I don't know, but I'm sad about this. Is this the end? I don't know, but I'm scared. Like when it comes to our pain, we got to be real that we suffer, and we just got to say what it is. So I'd encourage you, as you are real about your suffering, just say what it is. I'm angry right now. And I'm scared, and I'm worried, I'm afraid, I'm sad. There's no need to blow it up into this big thing. It's just, and Job is real about his suffering. So we got to be real about our suffering, and we got to be real about what's happening inside of us. Here's the second point on pain. We see it, Job 16:16. He said, my eyes are red with weeping. Dark shadows circle my eyes. Job 3:25, what I always feared has happened to me. What I dreaded has come true. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest. Only trouble comes. Job 6:8, oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant my desire. I wish he would crush me. I wish he would reach out his hand and kill me. This is intense. Have you ever felt that way? You ever felt so much pain? You just wish it was over? I hope not. But if you have, Job has too. Second point is this. So first we got to be real that we suffer. The second is this. Be real about what suffering does inside of you. And so again, I don't want to minimize it. I don't want to diminish it. You got to be real about what's going on inside of you. Here's how I'm feeling. Here's what's going on. Here's what this is doing to me. We got to be real about what this suffering is doing. And if you're like me, you try to handle it on your own. I don't need anybody. I got this. I can overcome this. And what happens is because this suffering is eating away at us, because we're feeling so low, because we're feeling so in pain, we can often isolate and shut ourselves off. I'll deal with this on my own. You can't. You need other people. That's another point that's coming up. But we got to be real about what our suffering is doing inside of us. Here's how I feel. You got to tap into that and not try and bury that or just dismiss it. This is what's happening inside of me. And I think it's important to be aware of a really dangerous message. And so there's an emotional prosperity gospel. Maybe you've heard about the prosperity gospel, and this is the idea. Maybe you've seen it with a televangelist or somebody saying, "Hey, if you send me $1,000, God is gonna give you 10,000." So and people do that, right? And when I hear that, I just want to say, okay, how about you send me $1,000 and God will give you $10,000? How about that? Right? Like this is just what I assume, somebody like that. But the prosperity gospel is this idea that if you give, God is going to give you even more. But it doesn't work that way. As dangerous as that is the emotional prosperity gospel. And maybe you've heard this from preachers on TV or radio stations or podcasts or live stream or anything like that. But the emotional prosperity gospel is so dangerous because what they say is true, what they're saying is true, but the danger is they don't say everything that's true, right? Let me rewind that and say again. What they say is true, but they don't say everything that's true. And so in the emotional prosperity gospel, the core principle is this, that Jesus makes your life better. And that's true. That's true. Jesus does make your life better. Even when you go through difficult things, Jesus makes your life better because you're not alone. He carries it with you. He helps you. He gives you strength. He provides. He gives direction. Jesus does make your life better. But sometimes what happens is people mishear that or they don't fully understand and they think Jesus makes my life easier. Or they translate better as things are going to always be good, and that's not true. When you follow Jesus, yes, Jesus makes your life better, but things are difficult. Sometimes things get more difficult. Sometimes things get harder because what's missing from the emotional prosperity gospel are things like die to yourself, take up your cross. What's missing from the emotional prosperity gospel is talk about hell. It's talk about gender and sexuality and God's roles for men and women. These things are missing in the emotional prosperity gospel. And so what you hear in the emotional prosperity gospel is your victory is just around the corner. That's true. But it's not all the truth. What you're missing from the emotional prosperity gospel is your tragedy is just a setup for your triumph. That's true, and that preaches good. And I could get you on your feet and clapping and happy and excited about that. I could say that your setback is a setup for God's success in your life, somebody, right? And you could, right? I could do that. But the problem is those catchphrases don't really work in the funeral home. They don't work in divorce court. They don't work in the doctor's office. So the emotional prosperity gospel is true, but it's not everything that's true. And the truth is, we got to be real about our suffering and what it's doing inside of us. How are you doing today? Oh, praise the Lord, bless the Lord. This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice in it. Well, that's awesome, and that's great, and that's true. But you just got fired from your job. So how are you really? Well, that's great, and that's true. But you just found out about infidelity. So how are you really? We got to be real about what our suffering is doing inside of us. Here's the next point that we see. So we got to be real that we suffer. Be real about what suffering does inside of you. And then here's the other one. Be real with others. If we're going to deal with pain and suffering in a healthy and a good way, we got to be real with others. Now, this is a hard thing to do. Being real with others is really difficult because if I'm real with others, I might get judged. I might get looked down upon. They might not understand. They might try and give unsolicited advice. They might try and fix me. Ladies, you ever have your husband try and fix you? You're like, don't fix me, just listen. See, being real with others can be really dangerous because others don't always respond the way that you need them to. See, Job, what happens is he's suffering like this, and his friends come and visit with him. And they sit in silence with him for 7 days. And this is one of the best things that they could do. They sit with him for 7 days in silence, and then they start talking. And then things get worse. Because what happens is they begin to give some unsolicited advice. So Job is going through this. He's just lost all of his wealth. He's lost his kids. His wife is saying, curse God and die. He's lost his health. He's sitting there in the dust, scratching himself with pottery, and his friends show up. And the best thing they do is they sit with him in silence and say nothing for 7 days. After 7 days, they can't take it anymore. Then they start talking. And they start telling Job why he's wrong, what he did wrong, why he deserves this, what he should do, all this stuff. They start just all over Job. This is not what Job needs in the moment. And then Job, again, this is dangerous when you're real with others. They might not respond in the best way. Job, he says to his friends after they're giving him this unsolicited advice, after they're trying to fix him, after they're accusing him, all this stuff. Here's what Job said. It's Job 12:2. He said, you people really know everything, don't you? And when you die, wisdom will die with you. You're the wisest people in the world. Well, I know a few things myself, and you're no better than I am. Who doesn't know these things you've been saying? Job 16:2. I've heard all this before. What miserable comforters you are. Won't you ever stop blowing hot air? What makes you keep on talking? I could say the same things if you were in my place. I could spout off criticism and shake my head at you. But if it were me, I would encourage you. I would try to take away your grief. Job says this because his friends aren't being very good friends in his suffering. And that's the danger with letting others in. That they won't always be the best friends, that they're going to try and give you unsolicited advice. And you know what unsolicited advice is. You've heard it, you've given it, and you know exactly how you feel. Unsolicited advice is when you give advice nobody asked for. And maybe you said that, probably when you were a kid. Nobody asked you. You don't say it now as an adult because you try and be polite, but nobody asked you. Somebody gives you unsolicited advice. How do you feel? You feel dismissive? You feel resentful? You feel bitter? Well, have you thought about? Yes, I thought about that. I knew about this before you did. Of course I thought about it. Well, have you tried? I tried it 5 times and it didn't work. Yes. See, the best thing that we can do when somebody is suffering is not give unsolicited advice, but to just sit with them. And you've gotten bad advice before. Not just unsolicited advice, but you've gotten some bad advice. There was a writer who was writing an article, and he asked people to send in some of the worst advice they'd ever gotten. Here's some of what people sent in. One person said this: the worst advice I'd ever been given is follow your heart. I don't need to follow my heart because sometimes my heart is stupid and I need to listen to my brain. Here's one. My dad said, don't go to the doctor's office if you only have one problem. Wait until you have 4 or 5 and then go, because that's how you get the most bang for your buck. Bad advice is winners never quit. Calculated quitting is how you move forward in life. If I never quit, I'd be stuck in some bad situations. One person said bad advice is never burn bridges. F that. Some bridges need to be bombed so they can never be crossed over again by either party. Last one. Somebody said, invest in DVDs because you can pawn them when you need money. So there's some bad advice. See, the truth is, people say some really stupid things when they try and give advice in suffering. And Christians are some of the worst. And so I want to share some things that you should never say to somebody when they're suffering. Don't ever say, well, people have been through worse. Again, you got to compare your situation sometimes. You got to get some perspective, but don't say that to somebody. That's what somebody has to decide on their own. Don't ever say this, well, I thought you'd be over that by now. Well, I guess God needed them in heaven. Well, it must have been God's will. Don't say, well, at least she lived that long. Don't say you need to move on. Don't ever say, well, everything happens for a reason. You tell me the reason why they died. You tell me here and now. That doesn't help. Don't ever say, well, God never gives you more than you can handle. Because you know people who are going through a period of pain, you know what they want to say? Yes, He is. Yes, He is. Because I can't handle this right now. This is way more than I can handle. Yes, He is. So don't. The best thing you can do when somebody is suffering is to simply sit with them, to be with them. This is what Job's friends do for him. The Bible actually gives us clear instruction on what to do when somebody is weeping. And it doesn't give us a sermon. It doesn't give us a prayer to pray. It doesn't give us a sentence to say to make them feel better. No. When somebody is weeping, the scriptures teach us, here's what you do. You weep with them. When somebody is weeping, you weep with them. And that's it. That's it. That's the best thing you can do for somebody who's suffering. I did a funeral once for a baby who was born dead. And as I stood in the auditorium of that funeral home, there was a casket in front of me the size of a shoebox. Caskets should never be that small. And I did the funeral, and I hope my words comforted the mom. I don't know. But the best thing that I did for that mom was to enter into her pain with her and wept with her. It wasn't the words that I said. I've sat in hospital rooms where people have been given a really bad diagnosis. I've sat with people in hospital rooms where they had less than a 50% chance of living, and they found that out. I've sat in hospital rooms where people were given less than 25% chance of living as I sat with them. I've sat in hospital rooms with people who are not going to leave those rooms alive. I've walked with men who found out that their wives cheated on them. In these moments, nothing I say would make anything better. But when I just sit and weep with them, that makes all the difference. It doesn't make their pain go away. It doesn't make it any better. But they don't need my words. They don't need me to try and cheer them up or fix their situation. So it's in those moments that I just sat, in their confusion, in their desperation, in their frustration, in their hurt, in their pain, and just wept with them. When we suffer, we have to be real with others, because that's when we find the comfort that we need. And now you know how to comfort somebody when they go through pain and suffering. Here's the other reason why we need to be real about our pain and suffering is because when we do that, it draws us closer to one another. It creates a community that we long for. When I'm real about my pain and suffering with other people, they can say, same here. You too? Same here. And now I'm not in this alone. Again, sometimes when we go through pain and suffering, we're tempted to want to withdraw and do it on our own, and I'll handle this and I'll figure this out. No, you need to press into others. And that's why I'm so proud of those of you who are in groups right now, because we're in this journey together as a church, going through being real with one another. and we're making breakthroughs and we're making progress and we're doing some real work. And I want to let you know, man, if you're not in a group, you are missing out. So get in a group tomorrow. We got 2 groups that are meeting up tomorrow in the Kempsville area. Tomorrow night, sign up for a group. If you're not in a group, you're missing out because you're coming to church, you're sitting in a seat, you're able to be a stranger, and hopefully you're inspired and equipped and challenged in what you hear. But the creation of community doesn't happen on Sunday mornings with a brief, hey, how are you doing? And then I'm out. It happens when we sit in a circle, in a group, and we share our life with one another. This is why we offer groups. This is why if you're not in a group, you're missing out on the community you long for. And so sign up for a group. You can stop by our lobby area, talk to somebody in a blue hoodie about getting in a group. You can sign up for a group through our app, through our website. But this is why we have groups, because we can't do this alone. And when we're real about our pain and suffering with others, that's when we realize that we can find community in one another. Here's the last point from pain that we see in Job's suffering. Job chapter 16, verse 7. Oh God, you have ground me down and devastated my family. As if to prove I have sinned, you've reduced me to skin and bones. My gaunt flesh testifies against me. God hates me and angrily tears me apart. He snaps his teeth at me and pierces me with his eyes. For you examine us every morning and test us every moment. Why won't you leave me alone, at least long enough for me to swallow? I cry to you, O God, but you don't answer. I stand before you, but you don't even look. You have become cruel toward me. You use your power to persecute me. You throw me into the whirlwind and destroy me in the storm. Job has some really strong words for God here. And here's a lesson, and this is the most important lesson. We got to be real with God. When it comes to our suffering, we got to be real that we suffer. We got to be real about what suffering does inside of us. We got to be real with others, but we also have to be, and most importantly, real with God. Because the truth is, God is big enough to handle your hurt and your pain and your suffering. He's big enough to handle your questions. He's big enough to handle your critique. He's big enough to handle your criticism. But I would say he's more than just big enough, he desires it. He desires for you to bring your hurt and pain and suffering to him. Because he's your heavenly Father. And as a father, I desire for my kids to bring what's going on in them to me. And I can't fix it. I can't make it go away. I can't make it any better. But when they do that, it creates intimacy. It creates a closeness. You want to be close to God? Bring your pain and suffering to him and tell him how you feel. And he might not give you the answers to your questions. He might not fix it. He might not make it better. But now you're close. And now you know he's with you. And he understands. Because if anybody understands their friends deserting them, it's Jesus. That's what happened to him before he went to the cross and while he was on the cross. If anybody understands going through something they don't want to go through and experiencing pain and suffering like never before, it's Jesus. Because that's what he experienced on the cross. And that's what we celebrate. And that's what we remember when we take communion. In a little bit, we're going to take communion together. And as we take communion, it's like we're resonating with Jesus. We're sitting with Jesus. And Jesus is saying, I know. He enters into our pain and suffering with us in communion. And it's like he's saying, I know. I know what you're going through. I know what you've been through. I've experienced it too. You're not alone. And so we've got to be real with God when it comes to our suffering. And so what if tomorrow you just start your day off this way? You just do an emotional check-in with God. I don't know where you are with God right now, but if tomorrow you just do an emotional check-in with God, you say, hey, God, here's what's going on in my life. Here's what I'm facing. I'm sad about this. I'm angry about this. I'm scared about this. I'm excited about this. I'm happy about this. Here's what's going on in my life. God, I need some comfort right now. I need some peace. I need some direction. I need some hope. And I hope you give that to me. And so today I just want to walk with you. And maybe together we can sort this out. Amen. What if tomorrow you just do an emotional check-in with God? That's it. Here's how I'm feeling. Here's what's going on. It's going to bring you closer to God. So we got to be real with God. You know, this series, Bloodstained Pews, is all about being real. It's about being a church where we can bleed in front of one another and not try and cover up the fact that we're bleeding, because we're all hurting, we're all broken, we're all damaged, we're all wounded. And the church is a place that we can come and be real about our brokenness, our hurt, our pain, our wounds. And this is inspired by the book, Bloodstained Pews, written by Pastor Carl Kuhl. He came and preached for us last week. But Carl, he's a friend of mine, a mentor, a coach. He's experienced some pain and suffering in his life. And not only has he experienced pain and suffering, I mean, all of us have, but his sister and brother-in-law experienced some pain and suffering as well. They experienced a storm they never thought would come in their life. And throughout this series, we've been sharing stories about people being real about their pain and suffering. And so they shared their story about the storm that they faced in their life. And this is a storm that hit out of nowhere. Again, something they never thought they would have to face. And so I want to share their story with you, but I want you to keep two things in mind as you hear this story. Carl's sister and brother-in-law, they know God and they know pain.
Hey guys, so it's Sable and Bella, so we're doing a room tour. So let's get on to it.
Sable was your typical 10-year-old girl. She loved playing with her friends. She loved everything craft related. She played basketball, although she wasn't really that great at it. She was funny. She was really witty. She told jokes all the time. She gets that from him. They would drop me off at Target and pick me up, and from the parking lot, she would yell out her window, "Mom, did you remember the tampons?" Like, you know, and that sort of wit, that like whatever she could do to embarrass you. She loved to go to Target with me. That was kind of our favorite place. She just was always with me. I would sit in the driver's seat and she sat, diagonal. And I even have a picture the day that I took her to the doctor. I turned around and took a picture of her over my shoulder. So it's very, very few times that I turn around and look at my shoulder. Don't think of that. Because she was just always there. She was just my best little friend.
I remember pulling into our little subdivision in our house, and every emergency vehicle that you could ever imagine was there. And I remember running to the front door, and it felt like I was in concrete, just trying to get there. As you get there, the police are stopping you at the door. I'm trying to look in, I'm telling them who I am. And finally they let me through. There's probably 10 or 15 firemen working on her, and I just wanted to get to Sable. But because all those guys were around her, I couldn't get to her, I couldn't see her. And I remember all I could see was her little hand through all of those guys. And it was just laying. The doctor was there, and I remember asking her, pulling her to the side, and I said, "Look, just give it to me straight. What are we doing here? What is going on with her?" And she said, "We just need your daughter to wake up. We're not giving her any sedatives. We just need her to wake up." And she said her window would wake up. So in the next 45 minutes, we need her to wake up. I was an elder at a fairly large church here in Cincinnati for years. And what I like to do, I love to go to funerals and comfort people, and I love to go to the hospital. So I was always going to the hospital, visiting people in our church, praying for them. That's just something I've always, the pastoring part is what I've always loved to do. And so now here I am with, my own child. I have served him my whole life. And my relationship at that time was probably the strongest it's ever been. And so I remember, you hear and you read about in the Bible where it talks about people groaning, like a groan, as they're praying. And I remember just a groan coming from a place that you just didn't know existed, and praying for her, knowing that I don't care what the doctors say, God's going to heal my daughter. At the end of the night, I really wanted to give her a bath, and I wanted our family to do it. And so the nurses were so caring, helping us wash her hair. All of us had different washcloths, and we were just washing her entire body. And we put her fresh pajamas on her that we had in, and they fixed her hair, and it was beautiful. I remember it was after 9. I had waited as long as I could, and I kept waiting and kept waiting. I knew at some point I had to do it. And so we all got together in the bed with her, my entire family. And we were holding her, my wife and I were. Put my hand inside of her shirt, right over her heart. I could feel it beating. And I nodded to the nurse. And the nurse went ahead and, disconnected her from everything. And again, I still had hope, and I was still praying. And
I remember he was laying on that side of Sable, and I remember we both had our hands on her heart. And after they had taken her off, her heart continued to beat. And I remember looking at him like, it's still beating. Like this is happening, it's still beating.
Mm-hmm.
And then it slowed, and you could feel it. And I mean, I think it probably only beat 15 more times, but you have just for like a brief second that hope that this isn't going to end the way we thought.
And grief's a funny thing. I think right afterwards, you still can't believe it.
There are still, it's been almost 3 years, and there are days when I stop and think, did that really happen? Especially the few days after, like you're in just such denial that this really happened. You just keep thinking you're gonna wake up from a bad dream.
We have a gymnastics challenge.
When your faith comes to mind about that grief, could we have done it without our faith? No. But at the same time, has it been easy? No. Every day for 23 years, I can confidently say that I journaled every day, writing in a journal as my prayer time. And so since Sable's passed, I have tried it twice and not been able to do it. And not been able to bring myself there because of, you're angry with God. God, all this stuff I've done for you, and here, when it comes to me praying and screaming and nothing, silence, nothing, I will never understand why he didn't answer that prayer and why he decided that Sable would be going home early.
I think for the first time in my entire life, I remember going to bed and having no words to pray. I had never experienced that before. And there was a part of me that didn't even know if it mattered if I prayed.
did I really have the faith before? Because if I did, why can't I get to where I need to be back to with my relationship? So in my mind, I know all the Christian things to say and all the answers, and I know what I need to do. But in my heart, I'm not there yet. And it's been 3 years. I could pray, and it would sound really good, but my heart is not right. And, hopefully I'll get there, and we'll get there. But could we have done it without our faith? Without our little village, our community, our church, and our pastors, and just the people who came around us and just surrounded us, and still 3 years later? I don't think so. But in my heart, no, it's painful.
So thank you guys for watching. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel, please. And so bye.
Pain and suffering will come in your life. And I want to talk to those of you who are suffering right now. See, in the event of Job's life, we see his suffering, and in the end, God does show up. But God doesn't answer any of Job's questions. And he doesn't bring Job's kids back to life. He doesn't make Job feel better, but he's present. When you get real about your pain with yourself, with others, with God, your pain probably won't get better, but you won't be alone. Here's what Job says, "But as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and he will stand upon the earth at last. And after my body has decayed, yet in my body I will see God." He's talking about resurrection. I will see him for myself. Yes, I will see him with my own eyes. I am overwhelmed at the thought. What Job is saying is, no matter what happens in this life, I will be resurrected and I will go to heaven. And this is a great hope that we have in Jesus. And for those of you who are suffering right now, just know you're not alone. But Jesus stands with you, and he sees you. I said earlier that our response to people who are weeping is that we weep with them, and we weep with them not just because that's the interaction God has with us, but because that's what we see Jesus do. There's a time in Jesus' ministry where one of his closest friends dies, and he shows up at the funeral, and he's asked all these questions, and he doesn't answer any of the questions. Jesus just wept. He entered into their pain. I want to let you know this morning, if you're suffering, if you're hurt, if you have pain, because your health is failing, because somebody hurt you, because somebody trashed your trust, because somebody died, you're not alone. And the great news for Scott and Holly is that they will one day see Sable again because they believe in Jesus, because they've been baptized into him, and because they follow him. The resurrection is ahead for them, and they will see Sable again. And so if you know Jesus, you will be resurrected. But if you don't know Jesus and you don't follow him, I want to ask you, please give your life to him. Believe that he died for you on the cross, that he rose again from the dead. Believe that so much that you decide, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to make you the leader of my life, and be baptized into him. If you have never made the decision to be baptized into him, today is the day for you to say, I want to go all in with Jesus and I want to follow him. Because Jesus doesn't promise to make the storm go away, but what he does promise is that he'll be with you through the storm, to carry you through the storm. And one day, you'll be with him in heaven where suffering doesn't exist, where pain isn't there. And so you have hope if you believe in Jesus. If you do not believe in Jesus and you are not following him and you have not been baptized into him, things will not get better. There is no hope for you. And so that's why you have to decide today to go all in with him. You can do that. Make the decision to follow Jesus and be baptized into him right now. And we want to know about it, and we want to help you get baptized. In our app, there's a form you can fill out. It's a connect form. There's a box there that says, I want to get baptized. Fill that form out, mark that box, let us know. Let's start planning for you to make that decision and for you to go all in with Jesus. If you don't do that through the app, you can talk to one of our guide team members as you leave. They're going to be in a blue hoodie. Let them know, I need to make a decision to follow Jesus. And if you do follow Jesus, communion is what gives us so much hope. So in your chairs, there's cups, and in those cups, there's a piece of bread. It reminds us of Jesus' body that was broken for us. The juice reminds us of his blood that was shed for us. I want to invite you to take that communion as we play this next song, just as a reminder of what Jesus did for you, that he enters into your pain with you, and you're not alone. And because you follow him, you can have hope, and you will see him one day. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for your grace and your mercy. We know pain and suffering are coming. We've experienced pain and suffering already, but we want to make sure that we build our life on the rock, on the foundation that is you, because without you, there's no hope. We want our strength to be in you. Yeah, so we draw close to you now. And we know that you draw close to us. In Jesus' name, amen.